I was born in Ohio, a place where hard work and honesty were supposed to mean something. My husband Michael and I had built our fortune from the ground up, turning a small tech startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. We lived in a sprawling estate with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and more rooms than we could count. We had everything money could buy, but we were about to learn that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because we treated someone with such cruelty that it took her refusal to quit to show us who we had become. Her name was Rosa, and she came to us through an agency that specialized in domestic staff for wealthy families. She was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that told stories of years spent in service to others. She had raised 3 children on her own after her husband passed away, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and in school. When she arrived at our door for the interview, she wore a simple dress that had been mended several times, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that I should have respected but instead found threatening. Michael and I had very specific ideas about how our household should run. We wanted someone invisible, someone who would maintain our perfect home without reminding us that another human being was doing the work. Rosa was hired not because we saw her potential, but because the agency assured us she was desperate enough to accept our unreasonable demands. We offered her a salary that was barely above minimum wage, expected her to work 14-hour days 6 days a week, and made it clear that she would live in the smallest room in the servants' quarters, a space barely larger than a closet with no windows and a bathroom she would share with the gardener. From her first day, we made Rosa's life difficult in ways that shame me to remember. My husband insisted that she wear a specific uniform that was uncomfortable and unflattering, designed to emphasize the gap between our world and hers. I created lists of tasks that were impossible to complete in the time allotted, then criticized her when she fell short. We refused to let her eat the same food we ate, instead providing her with the cheapest groceries and expecting her to prepare her own meals after she had finished cooking ours. We monitored her every movement, installed cameras in common areas, and made her clock in and out like she was working in a factory rather than caring for a home. The worst part was how we spoke to her. Michael had a way of making every request sound like an insult, his voice dripping with contempt whenever he needed something. I was no better, finding fault with everything she did and never once offering a word of thanks or encouragement. We criticized the way she folded towels, the way she arranged flowers, the way she walked across our marble floors. We made her feel small because it made us feel big, and we convinced ourselves that this was simply how wealthy people treated their staff. Rosa never complained. She arrived early every morning, worked through her breaks, and stayed late to ensure everything was perfect. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, polished silver until it shone like mirrors, and maintained our gardens with a care that suggested she actually loved the work, but her competence only made us more resentful. Michael began to worry that she was too good, that she might become indispensable, that she might gain some kind of power over us through her excellence. This fear, irrational as it was, led us to devise a plan to make her quit. We started by cutting her already meager salary, claiming that we were experiencing financial difficulties even as we planned a month-long vacation to the Mediterranean. We added more tasks to her daily list, expecting her to clean spaces that didn't need cleaning and reorganize systems that were already working perfectly. We began criticizing her in front of our friends during dinner parties, making cruel jokes about her appearance and her accent, treating her like she was part of the furniture rather than a human being with feelings and dignity. One particularly awful evening, Michael spilled red wine on the white carpet in our living room deliberately, then called Rosa in to clean it while our guests watched. He berated her for not preventing the spill, for not having cleaning supplies ready instantly, for not being able to remove the stain with the same magic that apparently everyone else's domestic staff possessed. Our friends laughed uncomfortably, But no one defended Rosa. She cleaned the stain on her hands and knees while we stood over her, and when she was done, she looked up at Michael with eyes that held no anger, only a deep sadness that should have moved us to shame. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop, because stopping would have meant acknowledging what we had become. We told Rosa that she could no longer use the washing machine for her own clothes, that she would have to wash them by hand in the utility sink in the basement. We informed her that she could no longer receive phone calls during work hours, not even from her children who sometimes needed to reach her. We started docking her pay for imaginary infractions, keeping a notebook of supposed mistakes that we had mostly invented. Through it all, Rosa maintained her dignity. She never argued, never raised her voice, never gave us the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She simply did her work with the same quiet excellence, and this only infuriated us more. We wanted her to quit because we were too cowardly to fire her outright, too afraid of how it might look to the agency or to our social circle if word got out that we had terminated someone without cause. Then came the incident with my jewelry. I had a collection of expensive pieces that I kept in a safe in my bedroom, and one morning I discovered that a diamond bracelet was missing. I didn't check carefully, didn't consider other explanations, didn't ask reasonable questions. Instead, I immediately accused Rosa of theft. I called her into my bedroom, stood between her and the door, and demanded that she confess. Michael joined me, his face red with manufactured rage, and together we created a scene that was designed to humiliate and intimidate. Rosa stood there calmly and asked if she could speak. We grudgingly allowed it, expecting excuses or denials. Instead, she asked when I had last worn the bracelet. I couldn't remember. She asked if I had checked the pocket of the dress I had worn to the charity gala the previous week. I hadn't. She suggested, with perfect politeness, that I might want to look there before making serious accusations that could destroy her reputation and her livelihood. I found the bracelet exactly where she suggested, still in the pocket of my evening gown. A reasonable person would have apologized profusely, would have been mortified by such a false accusation. Instead, Michael and I simply walked away without a word, leaving Rosa standing in the bedroom, her dignity intact, while ours lay in tatters on the floor. After the bracelet incident, we escalated our campaign to force Rosa out. We told her that we were implementing new rules, that she would now be responsible for washing all the cars every day, that she would need to prepare different meals for each of us based on our changing whims, that she would be required to work on Sundays with no additional compensation. We thought surely these demands would break her, would make her see that staying was impossible. She agreed to every new requirement without protest. She washed the cars until they sparkled, prepared our separate meals with attention to every detail, and showed up on Sundays with the same quiet determination. Michael started to panic, convinced that she was playing some kind of long game, that she was gathering evidence against us, or planning some kind of revenge. He became obsessed with getting rid of her, spending hours devising new ways to make her life miserable. We started leaving messes intentionally, knocking over vases and tracking mud through the house, then expressing shock and disappointment that Rosa hadn't already cleaned it up. We began inviting guests over with no notice, demanding elaborate meals with impossible preparation times. We criticized her in writing, creating documents that detailed her supposed failures, building a false paper trail that we thought might protect us if she ever tried to sue for wrongful termination. Rosa absorbed it all with the same quiet grace. She cleaned our messes, prepared our meals, and maintained our home as if she was caring for something precious rather than working for people who treated her with contempt. Her children called the house phone occasionally, and we could hear her speaking to them in Spanish, her voice full of love and warmth that she never showed to us because we had never given her reason to. Then Michael made a terrible mistake. He decided to plant evidence that would justify firing Rosa for cause. He took cash from his wallet, placed it in an envelope, and hid it in Rosa's room when she was working downstairs. His plan was to discover it later, claim she had stolen it, and use this as grounds for immediate termination without severance pay. He told me about his plan with pride, as if he had devised something clever rather than something cruel and illegal. But before Michael could execute his plan, something happened that changed everything. Our daughter Emma came home from college unexpectedly. She was a sophomore at an Ivy League school, someone we bragged about constantly but rarely actually spent time with. She arrived in the middle of the day, carrying a small suitcase and wearing an expression that mixed determination with fear. She found Rosa in the kitchen preparing dinner and asked if they could talk. I was in my office and could hear their voices but not their words. Emma spoke for a long time, and Rosa listened in that patient way she had. Then Rosa began to speak, her voice gentle and steady. They talked for over an hour, and when Emma emerged, her eyes were red from crying, but her face showed a kind of peace I hadn't seen in years. Rosa came out behind her, and for the first time since she started working for us, she looked directly at me with something other than professional courtesy. She looked at me with pity. Emma sat us down that evening and told us she was pregnant. She was afraid, unsure of what to do, terrified of how we would react. She hadn't come to us first because she knew we would make it about ourselves, about our reputation, about how it would look to our friends and business associates. Instead, she had come home hoping to find someone who would simply listen without judgment. She had found that person in Rosa, the woman we had spent months trying to break. Rosa had shared her own story, about being young and pregnant and afraid, about losing her husband and having to raise 3 children alone. She had talked about the choices she made, the struggles she faced, and the strength she discovered in herself. She had given Emma what we never could: unconditional support and genuine wisdom born from real experience rather than privilege and presumption. Now, this is where I did something that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. I looked at Rosa, really looked at her for the first time, and I saw a woman who had more character in her smallest finger than Michael and I had in our entire bodies. I saw someone who had endured our cruelty with dignity, who had maintained her integrity when we had lost ours, who had been there for our daughter in a moment of crisis, because she was kind and compassionate rather than because it was her job. And I decided that evening that everything had to change. Michael was furious when I told him we needed to talk about Rosa. He was still focused on his plan to frame her for theft, still convinced that getting rid of her was somehow important to our status and control. But I was done playing that game. I was done being the kind of person who measured their worth by how small they could make others feel. I told Michael that if he went through with his plan, I would leave him and make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man he really was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways we had tried to break Rosa, and how she had responded to each cruel act with quiet strength. I thought about Emma's tears and the fact that our daughter trusted our maid more than she trusted us. I thought about the kind of people we had become in our pursuit of wealth and status, and I was ashamed in a way that made my chest hurt and my eyes burn. The next morning I went downstairs early and found Rosa already working, preparing breakfast in the kitchen. I asked if we could talk, and she agreed with the same patient courtesy she always showed. I tried to apologize, tried to find words that would convey the depth of my regret, but everything I said sounded hollow and inadequate. How do you apologize for months of systematic cruelty? How do you express remorse for treating another human being as less than human? Rosa listened to my stumbling apology with that same calm expression. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I will never forget. She said that she had never considered quitting because she knew we needed her more than she needed the job. She said she could see that we were people who had lost their way, who had confused wealth with worth and power with purpose. She said she had stayed because she hoped that eventually we would remember how to be human beings rather than just rich people. Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was right, of course. We had become caricatures of wealthy people, playing roles we thought were expected, rather than living authentic lives. We had treated her terribly not because of anything she had done, but because treating her well would have required us to see her as an equal, and we were too insecure in our own worth to allow that. I told Rosa that I wanted to change everything. I wanted to pay her what she was actually worth, give her proper time off, treat her with the respect she deserved. She listened to my promises with skepticism, and I couldn't blame her. Why should she believe that this time was different? I had given her no reason to trust that my sudden change of heart was genuine or lasting, but I was determined to prove it. I started by tripling her salary, giving her a proper contract with reasonable hours and benefits. I moved her to one of the guest rooms, a beautiful space with windows overlooking the garden and her own private bathroom. I apologized for every specific instance of cruelty I could remember, writing her a letter that detailed my shame and my commitment to change. Michael was resistant at first. He couldn't understand why I was suddenly treating the help like family. He accused me of being weak, of letting Rosa manipulate me through Emma. We had terrible fights about it, arguments that revealed the deep cracks in our marriage that we had been papering over with money and status. He wanted to maintain the old order, where we were masters and she was a servant, where our money entitled us to treat people however we wanted. But something had shifted in me, and I couldn't go back. I told Michael that he could choose to change with me or choose to stay in his prison of arrogance and cruelty, but I was done living that way. I told him that Rosa had shown me what real strength looked like, and it wasn't what we had been displaying. Real strength was maintaining dignity in the face of humiliation. Real strength was choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. Real strength was refusing to quit when quitting would have been completely justified. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Michael remained hostile to Rosa for weeks, unable to let go of his need to feel superior. But gradually, even he began to change. He saw how Emma started coming home more often, how our daughter actually wanted to spend time with us now that we were becoming people worth knowing. He saw how Rosa transformed our house from a showplace into a home, not through her cleaning but through her presence and her steady example of how to live with integrity. Rosa helped Emma through her pregnancy, offering the kind of support and wisdom that came from lived experience rather than theory. She talked to our daughter about choices and consequences, about strength and vulnerability, about the difference between what society expects and what your heart knows is right. Emma decided to have the baby, and Rosa was there for every appointment, every moment of fear and doubt, every triumph and setback. Michael and I became different people during those months. We started actually talking to Rosa, asking about her life and her children. We learned that her oldest daughter was a nurse, that her son was studying engineering, that her youngest was teaching elementary school. We learned about her dreams and her struggles, her joys and her sorrows. We learned that she was a person, complex and valuable and worthy of respect, something we should have known from the beginning but had been too blind and arrogant to see. Rosa started to trust us, slowly and carefully. She began to share her opinions about things beyond housework, and we learned to value her perspective. She had a wisdom born from hardship, a clarity that came from seeing life without the distorting lens of wealth and privilege. She helped us understand that our money was a tool, not an identity, and that our worth as human beings had nothing to do with our bank account. When Emma's baby was born, Rosa was in the delivery room alongside Michael and me. She held our daughter's hand through the contractions, whispered encouragement when Emma was ready to give up, and cried tears of joy when our grandson came into the world. In that moment, I realized that Rosa wasn't our employee anymore. She was family, bound to us not by contract, but by shared experience and genuine affection. The birth of Emma's son, whom she named Joshua, marked a turning point for all of us. Michael, who had been the most resistant to change, fell completely in love with his grandson. He wanted to be a good grandfather, which meant he had to become a better person. He apologized to Rosa one day, a genuine apology that acknowledged the specific ways he had hurt her and took full responsibility without excuses. Rosa accepted his apology with grace, and slowly a real friendship began to develop between them. We restructured our entire household. We reduced Rosa's hours to something reasonable, hired additional staff so no one was overworked, and created a culture of respect and dignity. Our home became known among domestic workers as a good place to work, and we found ourselves with excellent staff who were loyal, not out of desperation, but out of genuine respect. Rosa started to teach us about her world. She took us to her church, a small community where people struggled with real problems but supported each other with genuine love. She introduced us to her children, who were understandably suspicious of us at first, but gradually came to accept us. We learned to cook her recipes, celebrated her traditions, and discovered that life was richer when we stopped trying to separate ourselves from everyone we considered beneath us. Michael transformed his business practices too. He started paying attention to how his company treated its workers, implementing better wages and benefits across the organization. He said that Rosa had taught him that how you treat people matters more than how much money you make, and he wanted his business to reflect that value. Some of our wealthy friends thought he had lost his mind, but others were inspired by the changes and started to examine their own practices. Emma graduated college and decided to become a social worker, inspired by Rosa's example of using your life to help others. She moved back home with Joshua, and our house became filled with the sounds of a baby laughing and a family actually functioning like a family. Rosa helped care for Joshua, but now as a grandmother figure rather than as hired help, and watching her with my grandson showed me what I had missed by being too focused on wealth and status to build real relationships. One day, about 2 years after Rosa first came to work for us, she asked if we could talk. My first instinct was fear, worry that she was leaving after all. But she wanted to thank us for changing, for becoming people she was proud to know. She said that she had prayed for us every night during those first terrible months, asking God to help us see what we were doing to ourselves as much as to her. She said her refusal to quit had been an act of faith, a belief that even people as lost as we had been could find their way back to their humanity. I asked her why she had endured all that cruelty, why she hadn't just walked away and found a family that would treat her better from the start. She said that sometimes the people who are hardest to love are the ones who need love the most. She said she could see that beneath our cruelty was fear that we weren't actually worth anything without our money and our status. She said she stayed because she hoped that if someone showed us what dignity looked like, maybe we would remember how to find our own. Rosa's words made me weep. She had seen through all our defenses to the insecurity and emptiness beneath. She had recognized that our cruelty was a symptom of our own brokenness, and instead of hating us for it, she had chosen to hope for our healing. That kind of compassion was foreign to me, coming from a world where everything was transactional and conditional. She had given us an unearned gift, and in doing so, she had saved our family. The impact of Rosa's refusal to quit rippled outward in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Emma's friends started coming to our house, drawn by the warmth and authenticity that had replaced the cold perfection. They met Rosa and heard her story, and many of them went home and started questioning how their own families treated their staff. Some of them began working in service industries themselves, seeking to understand the experiences of people they had previously ignored. Michael's business partners noticed the changes in him and started asking questions. He was honest about what had happened, about how badly we had behaved, and how Rosa had responded with dignity and grace. Some of them dismissed it as sentimentality, but others were moved by the story. Several implemented better practices in their own companies, improving wages and working conditions for thousands of employees. Our social circle shifted as well. Some of our old friends couldn't handle the changes in us, uncomfortable with our new insistence on treating service workers as equals. We lost invitations to certain parties and clubs, but we gained something more valuable: genuine friendships with people who valued character over status. Rosa introduced us to her community, and we found ourselves surrounded by people who had less money but more joy, less status but more genuine connection. One of the most profound changes was in how we viewed our wealth. We had always thought of our money as proof of our value, as something that elevated us above others. Rosa helped us see that money was simply a tool, morally neutral, until we decided how to use it. We started a foundation focused on supporting domestic workers, providing job training, legal assistance, and resources for those who were being exploited by employers like we had been. Rosa became the director of the foundation, using her experience and knowledge to create programs that actually helped people. She knew what domestic workers needed because she had lived that life, and her leadership made the foundation effective in ways it never would have been under our direction alone. Watching her thrive in this role, seeing her gifts recognized and valued, made us realize how much talent and potential we had been blind to when we were focused only on ourselves. The foundation started small, helping a few dozen workers in our area, but it grew rapidly. Rosa's story became known in the community, and people were inspired by her refusal to be broken by cruel employers, by her determination to maintain her dignity, regardless of how she was treated. She spoke at events and conferences, sharing her experiences and advocating for better protections and rights for domestic workers. Michael and I attended these events and listened to Rosa speak about her time working for us. She was always kind in her descriptions, never cruel or vindictive, but she was honest about what we had done and how it had made her feel. Hearing our actions described from her perspective was painful but necessary. It kept us humble and reminded us why we were committed to change. Emma thrived in her social work career, often partnering with Rosa's foundation to help vulnerable families. She said that having Joshua had changed her perspective on everything, made her realize that everyone was someone's child, someone's parent, someone who mattered. She credited Rosa with teaching her that lesson through example, by maintaining her humanity even when we were treating her as less than human. Joshua grew up knowing Rosa as abuela, the Spanish term for grandmother. He loved her with the easy, uncomplicated love of a child who had never been taught to see people through the lens of status or wealth. Watching him with Rosa showed us what we should have been all along: people who saw other people as people, who valued kindness over status, who measured success by the quality of their relationships rather than the size of their bank account. Years passed, and the transformation that Rosa's refusal to quit had sparked became permanent. We were different people, living different lives, guided by different values. We still had money, but it no longer defined us. We still lived in a nice house, but it was now a home filled with love and laughter rather than a museum designed to impress. We still had staff, but they were treated with dignity and respect, fairly compensated and genuinely valued. Rosa eventually reduced her hours at the foundation, wanting more time with her own family and grandchildren. She had earned the right to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of her labor after decades of hard work. We made sure she was financially secure, setting up a trust that would provide for her and her children. It was the least we could do after what she had given us, though no amount of money could truly repay the gift of helping us find our humanity. One evening we gathered for dinner, a regular occurrence now that our home was a place people actually wanted to be. Emma and Joshua were there, Rosa and her children and grandchildren, Michael and I, and several friends we had made through the foundation. The table was full of different foods, reflecting the diverse backgrounds of everyone present. The conversation was loud and joyful, punctuated by laughter and affection. I looked around at this gathered family, this community that existed because one woman had refused to quit when quitting would have been completely justified, and I felt a gratitude so profound it made my chest ache. Rosa had saved us from ourselves. She had shown us that dignity cannot be taken away, only surrendered, and that choosing kindness in the face of cruelty was the greatest strength of all. Michael caught my eye across the table and smiled. He knew what I was thinking because he was thinking the same thing. We had been so lost, so convinced that our worth came from our ability to control and diminish others. Rosa had stood firm in the face of our worst behavior and maintained her integrity, and in doing so, she had held up a mirror that showed us who we really were. The reflection had been ugly, but seeing it had been the first step toward change. After dinner, Rosa and I sat together on the back porch, watching the sun set over the garden she maintained with such care. I thanked her again for not quitting, for giving us a chance to become better people. She took my hand and told me that everyone deserves a chance to change, that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to do the hard work of transformation. I asked her if she had ever truly been tempted to quit during those awful first months. She was quiet for a moment, then admitted that she had written her resignation letter multiple times. She had lain awake at night, wondering if staying was worth the daily humiliation, questioning whether her hope that we would change was just foolish optimism. But each morning, she had gotten up and returned to work, choosing to believe that even people as cruel as we had been still had the capacity for growth. Rosa told me that the moment she had decided to stay permanently was the day of the false theft accusation with the bracelet. She said that in that moment, she had seen not just our cruelty but our cowardice, our inability to admit when we were wrong. She realized that we were people who desperately needed to learn that lesson, and she decided she would be patient enough to teach it, even if it took years. Her strategy had been simple but profound. She would maintain her dignity no matter what we did, would continue to do excellent work regardless of how we treated her, would respond to cruelty with quiet grace. She would show us, through her daily example, what integrity looked like. She trusted that eventually, if she remained steady, we would either break her or break ourselves against her immovable dignity. She had been willing to take that risk because she believed people were worth it. I told Rosa that I wished I could go back and undo all the pain we had caused her, all the humiliation and cruelty. She smiled and said that if we hadn't gone through that darkness, we wouldn't have found the light. She said our journey from cruelty to kindness was more valuable than if we had been kind from the start, because now we knew both ways of living and could consciously choose the better path. The night deepened around us, and stars began to appear in the sky. Rosa talked about her childhood, about learning from her mother that strength wasn't about dominating others, but about maintaining your core self regardless of circumstances. She said her mother had been a domestic worker too, and had faced even worse treatment in an era when workers had fewer protections and less recourse. Her mother had taught her that your job didn't define your worth, that you could scrub floors and still walk with dignity, that service was honorable work when done with pride and excellence. Rosa had carried those lessons into her own work, using them to survive employers who saw her as less than human. She said we were far from the worst family she had worked for, though that was hard for me to hear. She described families where physical abuse was common, where wages were withheld entirely, where workers were threatened with deportation if they complained about conditions. Our cruelty had been psychological and economic rather than physical, but it was still cruelty, and she was clear-eyed about that. But she also said that we were the only family who had ever changed, the only employers who had genuinely transformed from people who saw her as a servant into people who saw her as an equal. That transformation, she said, was why our story mattered. It proved that change was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances, even for people who seemed completely lost to arrogance and cruelty. The foundation we had created together had helped hundreds of workers escape abusive situations, and Rosa said that every person helped was a testament to what her refusal to quit had ultimately accomplished. By staying and maintaining her dignity, she had eventually broken through our defenses and sparked a change that rippled outward to help countless others. That, she said, was why she had never regretted staying, even during the worst days. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought us to this moment of genuine friendship. The cool evening air carried the scent of the flowers Rosa tended, and somewhere in the house behind us, we could hear Joshua's laughter as he played with Rosa's grandchildren. This was what life was supposed to be, I thought. Connected, authentic, full of relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Rosa eventually stood to go home, and I walked her to her car. Before she left, she hugged me with real warmth, and I hugged her back, grateful beyond words for her patience, her wisdom, and her refusal to give up on us, even when we had given her every reason to do so. I watched her drive away, this woman who had saved my family by simply refusing to let our cruelty diminish her dignity, and I said a prayer of thanks for the day she had walked through our door. The years continued to pass, and the changes Rosa had sparked in us became deeper and more permanent. Michael became known in business circles not just for his success, but for his ethical practices and genuine concern for his workers. Emma's social work brought her into contact with countless families struggling with the same issues of dignity and worth that we had learned about from Rosa. Joshua grew up in a home where kindness was valued over status, where people were judged by their character rather than their bank account. Our wealth became a tool for creating positive change rather than a wall separating us from the rest of humanity. We used it to support causes that mattered, to help people who were struggling, to create opportunities for those who had been denied them. Every dollar we spent in service to others felt like a small repayment of the debt we owed Rosa for teaching us what really mattered. The foundation expanded beyond domestic worker support to address broader issues of economic justice and worker rights. Rosa retired from the director position, but remained involved as an advisor, her wisdom and experience continuing to guide the organization. Young workers who had been helped by the foundation often came to meet her, to thank her for creating something that had changed their lives. These meetings were always emotional. People would tell Rosa stories of escaping abusive employers, finding dignified work, supporting their families with fair wages. They would thank her for believing that workers deserved respect and protection, for fighting to make those beliefs a reality. Rosa would listen with tears in her eyes, then remind them that they had done the hard work themselves, that she had simply helped open doors they had walked through with their own courage and determination. Michael and I were privileged to witness these meetings, to see the tangible impact of the transformation Rosa had sparked in us. We understood that our role was to provide resources and support, but the real heroes were the workers themselves, people like Rosa, who maintained their dignity in impossible circumstances and kept believing that a better world was possible. Our relationship with Rosa deepened into something that transcended any conventional category. She wasn't our employee, though we had once tried to make her one. She wasn't exactly family in the traditional sense, though we loved her as such. She was something more, a teacher, a guide, a living reminder of who we wanted to be and how easily we could slip back into who we had been. Emma often told her friends that Rosa had raised her in ways that Michael and I never had. She said that while we had provided material comfort and opportunity, Rosa had taught her what actually mattered, how to see people clearly, how to value everyone regardless of their status, how to measure success by the quality of your relationships rather than the size of your achievements. These lessons, Emma said, were worth more than any inheritance we could leave her. Joshua, growing up with Rosa as a constant presence, absorbed these values naturally. He never went through a phase of thinking he was better than others because of his family's wealth. He treated everyone with the same friendly respect, whether they were billionaires or janitors. When asked about this once, he simply said that Abuela had taught him that everyone has value, and he had never had reason to question that lesson. The ripple effects of Rosa's refusal to quit continued to spread in unexpected ways. Other wealthy families, hearing our story, began to examine their own treatment of domestic workers. Some reached out to the foundation for guidance on how to create ethical, respectful working conditions. A few even apologized to their longtime employees for past mistreatment, beginning their own journeys of transformation. Not everyone was receptive to the message. Some of our former friends dismissed the whole thing as naive or foolish, maintaining that servants should know their place and that kindness to workers was a weakness that would be exploited. These attitudes saddened us, but they also strengthened our commitment to the path Rosa had set us on. We had lived on both sides of that divide, and we knew which side led to genuine happiness and fulfillment. Years after Rosa first came to work for us, we organized a celebration for the Foundation's 10th anniversary. Hundreds of people attended, including workers who had been helped by the organization, business leaders who had been inspired to change their practices, and advocates who had partnered with us on various initiatives. Rosa was the guest of honor, though she was characteristically humble about her role in creating something so impactful. During the celebration, person after person stood up to share how Rosa or the Foundation had changed their lives. A young woman talked about escaping an employer who had confiscated her passport and forced her to work without pay. A man described finally receiving fair wages for his work and being able to send his children to college. A grandmother cried as she explained that the Foundation's legal assistance had helped her recover years of stolen wages. When it was Rosa's turn to speak, she was quiet for a long moment, visibly moved by the testimonies she had heard. Then she said something that captured the essence of everything we had learned. Dignity is not something someone can give you or take from you. It is something you carry inside yourself. My dignity was never diminished by how I was treated, but by choosing to maintain it, I was able to show others a different way of being. That is all any of us can do, be true to ourselves, and hope that our example helps others find their own truth. The room erupted in applause, but Rosa's words echoed in my mind long after the celebration ended. She was right, of course. Her dignity had always been intact, regardless of our attempts to diminish it. What had changed was our ability to see and recognize that dignity, our willingness to let it challenge and transform us. Michael and I had both given speeches at the celebration, acknowledging our shameful past behavior and expressing gratitude for Rosa's patience and grace. It was difficult to stand in front of so many people and admit how cruel we had been, but it was also necessary. Our story only had power if we were honest about both the darkness and the light, about both who we had been and who we had become. In the years that followed the anniversary celebration, we became even more intentional about living according to the values Rosa had taught us. We downsized our home, moving to a smaller house that met our needs without being ostentatious. We simplified our lives, focusing more on relationships and experiences than on accumulating possessions. We spent more time with Emma and Joshua, with Rosa and her family, with the community of friends we had built through the Foundation. Rosa's health began to decline as she moved into her 70s, though her spirit remained as strong as ever. She developed arthritis that made physical work difficult, and eventually heart problems that limited her activities. We made sure she had the best medical care available, but we also simply spent time with her, recognizing that her presence in our lives was a gift we shouldn't take for granted. One afternoon, sitting with Rosa in her apartment, I asked her what she wanted her legacy to be. She thought about it for a while, then said she hoped people would remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their job or their circumstances. She said she hoped her story would inspire others to maintain their integrity even when faced with cruelty, to believe that transformation is always possible, to choose kindness even when it isn't returned. Rosa also said she hoped that employers would learn from our story, would see how much they lose when they treat workers as less than human. She said that Michael and I had been miserable during the time we were cruel to her, that our wealth had brought us no joy because we were too busy trying to prove our superiority to actually enjoy our lives. By changing how we treated her, we had freed ourselves as much as we had honored her. This insight was profound and true. I remembered how unhappy I had been during those months when we were actively trying to make Rosa quit, how the cruelty had poisoned my days and disturbed my sleep. I had been constantly angry, constantly on edge, constantly measuring myself against others and finding the comparison lacking. The transformation in our treatment of Rosa had corresponded with a transformation in our own happiness, proving that kindness benefits the giver as much as the receiver. Michael visited Rosa regularly during her illness, bringing her favorite foods and sitting with her for hours. Their friendship had become one of the most important relationships in his life, and he often said that Rosa had taught him more about being a man than his own father ever had. He credited her with showing him that real strength was about lifting others up rather than pushing them down, about using your power to protect rather than to dominate. Emma brought Joshua to visit Rosa often, wanting her son to have as much time as possible with the woman who had been such a profound influence on their family. Joshua, now a teenager, had grown into a compassionate young man who volunteered at the foundation and talked about becoming a civil rights lawyer. He said Rosa's example had shown him that one person's integrity could change the world, and he wanted to dedicate his life to fighting for justice. Rosa's influence had truly rippled across generations. She had saved Michael and me from our worst selves, had been there for Emma during her crisis, and had helped shape Joshua into a person of character and purpose. Her refusal to quit when quitting would have been justified had set in motion a chain of events that changed not just our family, but countless other lives through the foundation and the transformations our story had inspired. As Rosa's health continued to decline, we spent more time reflecting on everything that had happened since that day she first arrived at our door. We marveled at how different our lives had become, how a woman we had tried so hard to break had instead broken us open to reveal the better people we could be. We were grateful beyond measure for her patience, her wisdom, and her unwavering dignity. Rosa passed away peacefully one spring morning, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, with Michael, Emma, Joshua, and me there as well. Her last words were about love and dignity, about maintaining your integrity no matter what, about believing in the possibility of transformation. She died as she had lived, with grace, with strength, and with an unshakable faith in the basic goodness of humanity. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Rosa had touched. Domestic workers came to honor one of their own who had stood firm and demanded to be treated with respect. Business leaders came to acknowledge the woman who had inspired them to change their practices. Foundation clients came to thank the person who had believed they deserved better and fought to make that belief a reality. Emma gave the eulogy, speaking through tears about the woman who had saved our family by refusing to accept our cruelty as the final word on who we were. She talked about Rosa's strength and dignity, her wisdom and compassion, her unwavering belief that everyone deserved to be treated as a human being. She said that Rosa had taught us the most important lesson any of us could learn, that how we treat others, especially those who seem powerless, is the true measure of our character. Michael stood and added his own tribute, acknowledging publicly what Rosa's refusal to quit had meant to him personally. He talked about being a man who had measured his worth by his ability to dominate others and how Rosa had shown him a different model of strength. He said that every good thing in his life now could be traced back to the moment when Rosa had quietly but firmly refused to be diminished by his cruelty. I spoke last, my voice breaking as I tried to express what Rosa had meant to me and to our family. I talked about the shame I felt when I looked back at how we had treated her, and the gratitude I felt for her patience and grace. I said that Rosa had given us an undeserved gift, the chance to become better people. I said that the best way to honor her memory was to continue the work she had started, to keep fighting for dignity and justice for all workers. The foundation established a scholarship in Rosa's name, providing educational opportunities for the children of domestic workers. We wanted Rosa's legacy to continue, wanted other young people to have the chances her own children had fought so hard to achieve. The response was overwhelming, with donations pouring in from people who had been inspired by Rosa's story. In the months after Rosa's death, I found myself thinking constantly about the journey we had all traveled together. I thought about the people we had been when she first arrived: cruel, shallow, obsessed with status and control. I thought about the people we had become through her influence: kinder, more authentic, focused on what actually mattered. The distance between those two versions of ourselves was enormous, and it had all been made possible by one woman's refusal to quit. I understood now that Rosa's refusal to quit had never been about the job. She had stayed not because she needed the money, though she did, and not because she lacked other options, though those were limited. She had stayed because she had seen something in us worth saving, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. She had believed that beneath our cruelty was the capacity for kindness, beneath our arrogance was the potential for humility, beneath our obsession with status was the ability to value human connection. Rosa had been right. We had possessed all those better qualities, buried under layers of insecurity and fear. Her steady presence, her unshakable dignity, her quiet example of integrity had gradually worn away those defensive layers until we could see ourselves clearly. The sight had been painful, but it had also been liberating. Once we saw who we had become, we could choose to become someone else. The foundation continued to grow and thrive, now led by Rosa's daughter Elena, who had inherited her mother's wisdom and compassion. Under Elena's leadership, the organization expanded its mission to include not just domestic workers, but all workers in vulnerable positions. The principles Rosa had embodied, dignity, respect, and the belief in everyone's inherent worth, guided every program and initiative. Michael and I remained actively involved in the foundation's work, but we were no longer the center of the story. The center was the workers themselves, people like Rosa who maintained their dignity in difficult circumstances, who refused to accept mistreatment as their due, who believed they deserved better and were willing to fight for it. Our role was simply to support and amplify their voices, to use our resources to help them achieve the justice they deserved. Emma's social work continued to intersect with the Foundation's mission, creating partnerships that helped vulnerable families access resources and support. She often said that every family she worked with reminded her of Rosa, people who were struggling but not defeated, who maintained their dignity despite circumstances that would have broken others. Emma approached her work with the same compassion Rosa had shown our family, believing in people's capacity for transformation and growth. Joshua graduated high school with honors and was accepted to several prestigious universities. He chose to study social justice, inspired by Rosa's example and the work of the foundation. He wanted to become a lawyer who fought for workers' rights, who held employers accountable for mistreatment, who ensured that what had happened to Rosa in our home wouldn't happen to others. His sense of purpose was clear and strong, another part of Rosa's legacy living on in the next generation. Years continued to pass, and the story of Rosa's refusal to quit became something larger than our personal experience. It was shared in worker rights organizations, in business ethics classes, in faith communities discussing dignity and justice. People found in Rosa's story a powerful example of how maintaining integrity in the face of cruelty could ultimately transform not just the person standing firm, but everyone around them. Michael and I often spoke at events about our experience, always careful to center Rosa's dignity and courage rather than our own transformation. We wanted people to understand that the hero of the story wasn't the wealthy couple who eventually changed, but the worker who refused to let their cruelty diminish her sense of self-worth. We wanted other employers to see how much they were losing when they treated workers as less than human, and how much they could gain by choosing respect and dignity instead. Some people struggled to understand why Rosa had stayed, why she hadn't simply left and found a better situation. We explained what she had told us, that she had seen our cruelty as a symptom of our own brokenness, and she had chosen to believe that even broken people could heal. She had stayed because she had faith in human potential, because she believed that showing us a different way of being might eventually break through our defenses. Rosa had been right to have that faith, though it had cost her months of pain and humiliation. Her refusal to quit, her determination to maintain her dignity regardless of how we treated her, had eventually cracked our armor of arrogance and forced us to see what we had become. That moment of painful self-recognition had been the beginning of our transformation, and it had only been possible because Rosa had been patient enough and strong enough to wait for it. Looking back across the years, I could see the clear line from that first day when Rosa arrived at our door to the people we had become and the work we were now doing. Every good thing in our lives could be traced back to her influence, to the example she had set, to the lessons she had taught through her quiet dignity and unwavering integrity. She had saved us from lives of hollow success and meaningless achievement, had shown us what actually mattered and how to live in alignment with those values. The foundation Rosa had inspired continued to grow and evolve, adapting to meet new challenges while staying true to its core mission of honoring worker dignity. Programs expanded to address wage theft, unsafe working conditions, discrimination, and exploitation in various industries. Legal aid services helped workers recover stolen wages and hold abusive employers accountable. Educational initiatives taught workers about their rights and gave them tools to advocate for themselves. Each person helped by the foundation was a testament to Rosa's belief that everyone deserved dignity and respect. Each employer who changed their practices after hearing our story was proof that transformation was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. Each young person inspired to fight for justice carried forward the legacy Rosa had created through her refusal to quit in the face of cruelty. Michael often said that Rosa had given him his life back, had freed him from a prison of arrogance and insecurity that he hadn't even known he was living in. Before Rosa, his worth had been entirely tied to his wealth and his ability to control others. After Rosa, he understood that real worth came from character, from how you treated people, from using your resources to help rather than to dominate. This shift in perspective had made him genuinely happy for the first time in decades. I felt the same gratitude and transformation. Before Rosa, I had been constantly anxious, constantly comparing myself to others, constantly trying to prove my worth through external markers of success. After Rosa, I understood that my worth was inherent, not dependent on my bank account or my social status. This knowledge had brought a peace I had never experienced before, a contentment that came from living in alignment with my values rather than in constant pursuit of validation. Emma often reflected on how different her life would have been if Rosa hadn't been there during her crisis. She might have made different choices about her pregnancy, might have approached motherhood with fear and shame rather than strength and hope. Rosa's support and wisdom had changed the trajectory of Emma's entire life, had helped her become a mother and a person she was proud to be. And Joshua, growing up in a home transformed by Rosa's influence, had never had to unlearn the toxic values Michael and I had once held. He had absorbed from the beginning the lessons about dignity, respect, and the inherent worth of every person. He approached the world with an openness and compassion that would have been impossible if Rosa hadn't refused to quit, hadn't stayed long enough to transform our family's values and culture. The ripple effects of Rosa's decision to stay continued to spread in ways we couldn't fully track or measure. People who heard our story and were inspired to change their own behavior went on to influence others. Workers who were helped by the foundation became advocates who helped other workers. Young people who learned about Rosa's example carried those lessons into their own lives and careers. spreading the values of dignity and respect to new contexts and communities. As I grew older and reflected on my life, I became increasingly aware of how close we had come to missing out on all of this. If Rosa had quit as we had wanted her to, if she had walked away from our cruelty and found a different job, we would have remained the people we were, shallow, unhappy, obsessed with status and control. We would have raised Emma in that toxic environment, would have passed our worst values on to Joshua, would have lived and died without ever understanding what actually mattered. Rosa had saved us from that fate. By refusing to quit, by maintaining her dignity in the face of our cruelty, by believing that we could change even when we gave her no reason for that belief, she had given us the chance to become better people. It was a gift we had not earned and did not deserve, but she had given it anyway, out of a generosity of spirit that still left me in awe. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to completely transform how we treated Rosa and open myself to change, because this decision didn't just alter our household dynamics. It cost me friendships with people who thought I had gone soft, turned some business partners against Michael, who saw his new ethics as weakness, and left our social circle so divided that some of our oldest friends haven't spoken to us in years, and I'm sure some of them won't be inviting us to their exclusive charity galas this year.